Good afternoon. How is everyone today? Wonderful. I'm really happy to be here. I'm so excited about these two men that I'm about to introduce to you. The name of the conference, as you know, is Capital Matters. And we're here with two incredible individuals that sit on top of and are involved with very conscious capital. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking, obviously, about me, because I don't matter. They do. And hearing about what they are doing in their respective worlds is going to be quite impactful. I'm going to start off by doing something that's a little different. You can read their bios, but what's much more important than what they do is who are they, what's in their heart, and what matters to them. So I'm going to start off with that question. And I've known Jim Casselberry since I was in my 20s. And let me just frame him just a second, and then I'm going to let him answer who he is. Jim's a legend in the industry. He's like those powerful people that you never see, or you don't see as often, but he's extraordinarily impactful. He's been in the consulting business. He led important positions there. He owned an investment management firm that had $8 billion at one point. He's done so many different things, and now he heads a family office of over $2 billion. And he had the privilege of doing what he does best, is being authentically Jim. He was an investor, and he invested and would take risk on things when other people wouldn't. And following your presentation today, there are individuals that we know that you get better returns when you're willing to do what others aren't. And Jim led by example during the financial crisis, not the most recent one, but even before, by saying, I'm going to put money up for an investment concept around the RTC. You might not know that, but I'm just sharing, this is what I know about him, and made incredible returns, and at the same time made people in the business quite wealthy along the way. So I'm a big fan of Jim's, and I'm really honored that he is here. And so I'll let him answer that question. I just only recently met Kojo, and I can tell that they're cut from a similar cloth. They also care about important things, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that. So I'm going to sit down and join with them. This is a conversation. I will get through a set of questions, and I'm going to open it up for you. So let's start off with, who are you, Jim? What do you care about, and what brought you to where you are?
Well, I think the best way to start, Kojo and I were just literally having a conversation, and I think first and foremost, I'm a father. I have three children, a stepson who's 35, my daughter is 29, and my son is 27, and I feel I was very intentional in raising my children, and they're all doing okay. My stepson's down in Columbus, working in making social impact with a project around Nationwide Hospital down there, where they're looking at the total well-being of people moving from homelessness to housing. Then my daughter is just recently married and also graduated last year from University of Chicago with MBA and JD, and is working at Sidley in fund formation. And my son is 27 and graduate of University of Massachusetts Amherst, and he's working for the Boston Celtics in the front office of the CFO. So those are my greatest accomplishments.
I love it.
And then my day job is I work for a family that has taken the giving pledge to an exponential level, where they're pledging to put out over 95% of their corpus wealth, which right now, depending on stock prices, right around the $2 billion mark. And we have, our mandate is to narrow the gap between racial, social, and economic inequalities. And I had the experience of working at the MacArthur Foundation in the early mid-90s, where I was able to do what a lot of things that are now called impact or mission-related investing. We did it there. It was experimental with the corpus of the endowment versus it being a separated entity. And we had some great successes. So I know it works. And to now be at this point in my career, to be able to work with a family that wants to direct their assets, to be able to do this work is, it's a privilege. And as you say, I like to kind of be the guy behind the curtain and make things happen, you know. And two of my guys are actually in the audience, Napoleon and Talib. We have an opportunity zone fund that we are investing in, $7.5 million, that's going to use a brilliant idea that they came up with using 504 SBA program. One of the most successful SBA programs, but it's also one of the ones that is the least utilized by women and minority-owned businesses. And along the lines of what was talked about during lunch, collateral is the issue. And so we're going to use the equity investment from the opportunity zone to be the collateral in those deals.
Great. We're going to hear a little bit more about that when we give some examples of what's worked really well. Kojo, tell us, who's Kojo?
Yeah, so...
What are you about, and how did you get here?
Yeah.
Where you're from, all of that.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Brooklyn, third generation New Yorker. My mother is a baby boomer, one of 10, so in the city of New York, I'm never alone. There's about 50 of us, not more, in the borough of Brooklyn. So growing up in this huge family of folks, you know, Thanksgiving, everyone's in one place and you can barely move. You've all, most of you probably experienced that. And it gets me to a place where the family is the most important thing to me. And so as a kid, that's narrowly defined by your extended family. But as you, especially as a black man, you leave your family, go to university, what have you, start realizing, no, it's actually everyone that looks like me is pretty much my family because their challenges are my challenges. Like one of the things that struck me when I was in my 20s was like, I'm over here complaining I have to send money home to take care of my family. And then I realized like that's actually the case for most black people. Like they're supporting their parents, not the other way around. And we realized that that's like a common struggle for folks. It's like, okay, we're all in this together. We got to kind of work together to kind of resolve some of these problems that we didn't create, but no one's going to really put the step forward to kind of fix it for us. So my path to where I am today, and I lead mobility investments for Emerson Collective, and I'm also leading an initiative around community development. We have a very specific community that we're interested in the state of California, which we hope will provide best practices for other parts of the country. Before I came to Emerson, I wasn't always an impact investor. I was just a kid, you know, from Brooklyn who was divorced when I was 10. We moved in with my grandparents when I was 11, you know, the one step back, two steps forward kind of thing. And I was just trying to like make enough money so I didn't have to worry about money. You know, that whole, you know, I remember the day I was able to go to a supermarket and not have to worry if something was on sale. I thought that was a glorious moment. So I did my first degree in engineering, which is actually my passion is in engineering. Was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. And then after that, did my MBA and also a degree in international affairs. And that's kind of that got me on the path that I'm on now. Because from there, I was in the finance world as an investment banker for 5 years, which is an incredibly brutal life. And I wouldn't recommend to anyone, if you want to spend 100 hours a week for 5 years straight and sleep underneath your desk at least once a week, that's a great job for you. a bunch of other things happened. Eventually, I was fortunate enough to find an opportunity to work in California for Google, now Alphabet. And within the first couple of years, I worked with some really creative individuals, no surprise, being Google, and I ended up running all of corporate finance for now Alphabet, then Google. So that was everything from capital markets, which is, debt financing, equity sell downs, blah, blah, blah. And then also we picked up, and this is my entry into actually having an input on change, we picked up our investment platform on investing in renewable energy. So the whole idea at the time was, this is circa 2011, 2012, that the clean energy 1.0 didn't work. Windmills, it's kind of funny to talk about today, it seems like that's foolish, but back then it was like this whole idea of wind power powering the grid is something that it's for the wonks in California, maybe in 1 or 2 parts in Washington, but it's really just gas, coal, and hydro. And Google stepped in and said, no, we can actually demonstrate that there's enough money here and there's opportunity to make money in renewable power. And we always went in with the intention that we want to expose the marketplace to this opportunity to make money, and so much so that we can put ourselves out of business. So we ended up putting $1 billion into that market, and today, as a result of that, we're one of the many participants, today to think that green energy is something that can power the grid is no longer something for the wonks. It's like, okay, how do we get there? What are the next couple of steps that finish that transition? In addition to that, we also began investing in affordable housing. So through the low-income housing tax credit, we put a lot of money into building homes in places where banks generally would not finance. So for those of you who are not familiar with the tax credit market, it's typically financed by the large banks through a process known as Community Reinvestment Act. So the government basically said, hey, if you want to put a bank in these people's community, you have to put some of those proceeds from that bank back into their community. So the banks check the box by investing low-income housing tax credits because they also get a return. But there are certain communities where there's a need for affordable housing that still qualify for tax credits, but there's no bank. So if I'm at a Citigroup or a Wells Fargo and I don't have a branch in that particular community, which if you think about it, if you're a disadvantaged community, how many of those communities have, a Chase or what have you? They don't. I mean, some do, but many don't. So again, we stepped in and started funding into communities where the banks would not put in. And eventually what it did is it showed the other private investors that there was really an opportunity to make money and drove down the cost of capital, and then we exited that market as well. After spending a brief amount of time as a CFO of a startup, so that's a very painful experience, ended up at Emerson where I am today, and leveraging kind of the experiences across my entire career to date, we ended up where I am now, trying to really push this way of thinking that you can put money in places that have historically been overlooked. This is really what it is an arbitrage. You just have to do better underwriting. And you can see really unimaginable returns. And if you're willing to put your risk capital there, you can really help people doing the right thing, but also make that return that you as the investor need to make regardless. And so that's where we are now. Emerson Collective is a social change organization. We have many tools by which we affect change. I'll give you the 20-second commercial. We put money in philanthropy. We put money behind policy solutions, and then we put money in traditional investment vehicles with a focus on providing the greatest good to the greatest amount of people. So that's how I end up here. So I'm a family person with a very large family.
That's great. And before we came here for this session, we were talking outside about some of the things that mattered. And just for the audience, I'd just like for them to hear you say about how you think about risk and disappointments and failures, just really briefly.
Well, I think the thing that Val is alluding to is it's safe to say that my career has been a bit of a roller coaster ride of both highs and lows. But I think the greatest growth that I've achieved is from coming back from my setbacks, from coming back from being knocked down. to the point where I am now, and when I look at entrepreneurs and when I look at who I want to partner with, I really do look for what you learn from your failures. You know, what were your failures? And I don't want to say I don't trust people who haven't had failures, but I do look at them like, really? I think it's important. I think it's important to be able to be self-reflective, to be able to, you know, own what happened to you, be responsible for what happened to you, but also be responsible for getting up. And I think that that's a very important component of being able to get to and achieve success.
That's right, because often when we see people like these two individuals in these roles, we think everything has been great. And I think it's particularly important if you're an entrepreneur and you're a woman or person of color, you're going to have some setbacks, but thinking that you're alone in that is just not good.
Yeah, I agree with that. I often say the lessons are in the scars of failure. And I agree with you. Either a person that said they've never had a failure is lying to themselves, which is the worst thing you could ever do, or has not really been trying hard, right? And you're not going to really know how far you can go without pushing you to a point of failure. And to be quite frank, when you do fail, the power of dissecting what went wrong only makes you stronger the next time you go back out there, because you'll be like, well, I know what not to do.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, as an investor, because I was CFO of a company that within the first 2 months of me taking over as CFO, we had a product recall of all of our products, and I then spent the rest of my time at the company keeping the company from going under. And we had about 80 people working for us, and as a CFO, you feel responsible that, you know, if we go under, it's not my fault, I didn't design the product, but if we go under, it's my fault because I'm supposed to find capital, and, you know, so I spent, you know, marine my time tap dancing and helping the company have enough money, liquidity to get to a place where they can repair the products, get new product out, and get cash flow positive. And through that lesson, I was able to really dig into, you know, the question of how do we get here? You know, what are the things and the obstacles that are now in our way to getting to the other side of this valley of death that we've entered into? And now today, as an investor, it allows me to be empathetic to, not that I wasn't before, but even more so, to entrepreneurs that are coming in the door, not only through the lens of, hey, I know what it's like to be an entrepreneur, but more importantly, like, I can help them appreciate it. And we were talking about this earlier today, the networking and the mentoring piece. I can help you appreciate kind of what's around the corner, right? So in addition to getting capital, because you know capital is the blood of a business, you also want someone to help you think about the things you haven't considered before, especially if it's your first endeavor, right? You need someone to help you think, well, you're 5 people today, and when the company gets to 100 people, it's a completely different ball game. Yes, you're gonna have to bring in HR at this point, and or if you're a hardware company and you're building product, okay, great. It's easy to build, you know, 2 of something. It's really hard to build 1,000 of something that's exactly the same and understanding the different pieces. Mm-hmm. And I can read a book and repeat those words. It's very different to have actually been there and yelled at the contract manufacturer, that this contract is garbage, and I don't know why they signed it before, and having to restructure that versus just saying, well, I read it in the book, so you guys should follow this framework. Exactly. And as an entrepreneur, you know, it's okay to fail. It actually is probably good to fail, because when you go back to your second, third, fourth, fifth endeavor, everything that you did wrong is only going to inform and allow you to do things right. Right, and it's, just to sum that up, I read someone describe that very successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley say that I failed, therefore I'm experienced, whereas many folks of color and women, it's like I failed and therefore I'm a failure. And that's a really important, different lens on the experience. So moving from the lows to the highs, can you share a little bit about some of the investments that you made? Kojo, working for Emerson Collective, they do their investments anonymously, so he's going to be really creative in the way that he shares what he does. Jem, maybe you lead us off with what are some of the investments that you made that you're really excited about, that you'd like to highlight, where capital matters?
And there are a few.
There are a
Pick
few.
pick some of your best.
Remind me if there's some that I forget. One, I'm really excited about what we're doing with 504 Capital that's going to be in North Carolina, investing in Durham, Winston-Salem, and Greensboro.
And is that investing in companies? Or that's a real estate play?
No,
And
that's investing in companies. The product will probably be entrepreneurs being able to buy the property where they're operating out of. So it will help them be able to increase the collateral that they need to be able to go out and get conventional lending and to be able to upgrade their capital structure to be able to move forward and get cheaper money, because that's one of the things that for majority entrepreneurs, they are usually able to be in the position of having a lower cost of capital because of friends and family, and because they go in with having that collateral that they can get lower rates on their debt.
Now let's go back just so that everybody understands. How many, I won't ask yet. So in this scenario, what is it that creates the collateral? You've put in $7 million into.
Right, and so that money will go into businesses as equity in a minority position. And because it's going in through an opportunity zone, it's patient capital. So we're not looking for an exit until year 10.
Okay.
And then the exit that we're really looking to, because we have the unique situation of, I have a position of $1.7 billion in Paylocity stock at a zero basis. So if I invest $100 million, if I want to invest $100 million, divest $100 million, then my tax on that would be about, let's say, 24%, right? So that would be 24 million, so that would only leave me 76 million to invest. But if I invest in an opportunity zone, then I can invest the entire 100 million.
Yeah.
So that also, part of my return isn't just the financial aspect of it, but I'm also doing the tax liability management for the family. So I have a lot of different dials to be able to use to be able to calculate actually what I need on a return of capital that's a little bit different, and it allows us the flexibility to be able to do these innovative things. And the way I look at my capital stack is a little bit different.
Yes.
And again, I don't want to get too academic because I started out as a bond geek, as Charles Curry will attest to. And, duration and convexity are fun for me. I think of the capital stack as from philanthropy all the way up. And so I then look at the expected return based on where I'm putting money in on the capital stack. So if I'm putting my money in at something where I know that I'm funding some cost that's going to then eventually support an ongoing organization, my financial expected return is going to probably be just a return of capital or zero, right? But the other utility I'm looking for is what's the impact, or did that actually get to a sustainable organization? So I can then measure my risk and measure my expected return based on where I'm investing on that capital stack. And therefore, I don't look at any of it as concessionary returns. Where I'm investing is I'm earning the expected return is what I want. And then we dissect it a little bit further to look at the utility of that return, right? So if it's farther down, we're going to probably have a higher utility return that's required and a lower financial return that's required.
That's very creative. There's a big debate in the marketplace around on the spectrum of impact versus non-impact investing. And earlier we were talking, sometimes when you say you're investing for impact, the presumption is that there's concessionary returns. And if you think about it the way you've described it, that's not the case.
Right.
And Kojo definitely doesn't want to invest in things that gives concessionary returns. So can you share some things you're excited about and that you've invested in that's successful?
Yes, I will. I'll give you two. I want to touch on the concessionary return thing. So the capital markets is, I think, as of 2018, $32 trillion. The capital equity capital markets is $32 trillion in the United States. Same time period, philanthropic dollars, charitable giving, $400 billion. And just ask yourselves this question: if you had to choose between $400 billion and $32 trillion to affect change, which of those two would you rather have? Which one would give you more shots on goal to have the outcomes you want? Since the $32 trillion equity capital markets, it's just capitalism. So they do two things. They want to maximize profitability and lower cost, and charitable giving is charitable giving. I want to ensure that the investments that we make is squarely viewed through the lens of that $32 trillion. Mm-hmm. Now, keep in mind, that's the part of Emerson Collective where I work at. We have philanthropic efforts. We work together to create structures that has both a philanthropic component and a for-profit component. But the way I look at the world, I want the stuff that I work on to come through that $32 trillion lens. And why is that? Because then, if I have impact through that lens, then I can attract, the people who actually care, which is the people I want to attract, but then I just attract people who want to make money, but they end up doing the right thing as well. And that's why it's important that what I put forth is something that is scalable and that we can say, okay, here, if you're the pool of capital that needs to make your 10%, okay, make your 10%, but you're also going to do the right thing, right? If you're the pool of capital, well, I just want to do the right thing, I'll take a lower return. Well, how about this? You'll get your 10%, which is the higher return you expected, and you get to do the right thing, right? So that's kind of the lens and that's why I'm sensitive to being considered concessionary capital. It's not because I have an issue with it, I don't. It's more of the impact and the direction I'm trying to take the dollars I have to deploy.
Sure.
To answer your question on things I'm excited about. First degree is aerospace engineering, so I like machines, math, science, whatever. And about 2 years ago, we made an investment in an autonomous vehicle company, and everyone's been talking about autonomy. It's all over the place.
And what
autonomous vehicle company.
Describe that.
It's a robot that takes people around so you don't have to drive. And why I'm excited about it is, like, why does Emerson Collective make those kind of investments? And it's really, if you take a step back and think about, because we're in North Carolina, so I can totally say this, I can't say this in New York because it doesn't land well. If you own a car, right, your car, you actually use it 2 out of 24 hours a day. The other 22 hours it sits somewhere collecting dust. And think about the amount of money you have to pay insurance, gas, purchase or lease, and you're only using it 2 out of 24 hours a day. So if I took that away from you, you were paying a fee for service. So anytime you need to go somewhere, similar to an Uber or a taxi for that matter, a car showed up and you went where you had to go, you would do that because in theory, you should have less money out of your pocket because I'm not supporting the cost of a vehicle that I'm not using. I'm using, I think it's like 10%, 4% a day I'm using. So the company we invested in is looking to push the autonomous vehicle forward, not to the sense that we can have robot taxis, although I think that's cool, but really to reduce the load on everyone's wallet to go from point A to point B. Now, the next response typically I get, well, I ride Uber all the time and it's more expensive than driving my own car. That's right, because you're paying for the driver in the car, right? So if you take the driver out, and this is actually the argument that Travis never should have said, but he did say, is that I have a great business model except for the guy in the front seat. So fundamentally, pulling out the cost of the driver back to capitalism to reduce costs, you get to a place where you end up spending less money to go to the exact same place. And then also why I'm excited about this company, they're looking at it through the lens of climate. So they want to do it on a completely electric platform. So for those of you who are not very familiar with kind of the greenhouse gases and whatnot, the number one source of greenhouse gases globally is power generation, lights, heat, what have you. Number two, not that far behind, is transportation, airplanes, trucks, cars, and whatnot. So if we can transition our transportation industry to electric, and then we can reduce the load on individuals' pockets, I believe that's a good outcome for everybody.
That's great.
And oh, sorry, one last thing. The impact of owning a car or leasing a car or what have you is disproportionately felt by people of color. Right? Because they have less wealth to purchase these services or purchase the car. So if I can take more money out of their pocket, if I can take more money out of their cost to put more money back in their pockets, they're better off. And just think about it from if you make $30,000 a year, and everyone knows the income inequality, so I need to use the specific number. You make $30,000 a year, and you put $10,000 a year into whatever service, and I reduce that 10 to 2. So you have that much more dollars to spend on whatever you need to spend it on. Versus if you're making $50,000 a year, and you still that $10,000 impact to you is not the same. Yep. So those three things converging is one of the reasons why I'm very excited about this company in particular. And they specifically have a lens. There's a lot of times people come together. They specifically have a lens on equity, which is one of the reasons why I invested in it. The second one, which we will announce in November, but I can talk about it in a broader sense, is real estate investment we're doing in California. And we're looking to take advantage of the trends that are going on globally. I used to think it was only in the major cities. And I've done a bit of a tour trying to get smart, talking to real estate folks. And the trend is that people are moving back into cities. No surprise. You all already are experiencing it. Anyone that lives anywhere near any sort of metropolitan area, you're really feeling it. What really turned the corner for me is I was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is not that far from here, and they too are feeling it. The numbers are smaller, but on a relative basis, the pain is the same. And why this is interesting is if you think about America and its challenges over the past 60 years on housing, you'll remember that America forced a meaningful portion of people that look like me to stay in the cities, while everyone else got to leave the cities and get brand new schools, brand new infrastructure, brand new homes. And the trend of people moving back into the cities is largely driven by the suburban model doesn't really work. I'm sure there's someone who loves to drive everywhere, but most people don't. Empty nesters want to live next to services. They don't want to be 5 miles from the hospital. They want to be half a mile, so they move back into cities. Millennials completely threw the model out the window. And if you look at other parts that didn't have a kind of subsidized move to the suburbs model that we had, most countries you have a core, a dense urban core. There's always, like I said, there's always someone that wants the suburbs. So you have a thin suburban ring and then go straight rural. And someone would argue at that point, well, look at Europe. It's like there's people everywhere. And the reality is there's a bunch of small cities that grew towards each other. So they don't really have suburbs there either. Back to the US. So you have the situation where the demand is to move back to the cities. So what the game is playing out now is, and not everywhere, but in many places, the zero-sum game where I'm going to come in and you're going to move out. And that I don't believe is necessary. And I actually don't think it's helpful, right? In many ways, if you were to go back to America in like the 20s and 30s, it was actually more integrated than it is in the 80s and definitely in the 90s. And having people move back to the cities could be an opportunity not only for the people that want to live in the cities to live there, but also to improve the conditions of people that have been historically left behind, right? So those dollars that are coming in from the suburbs can be used to make the schools better for the people who live there. They shouldn't have to leave. So we're in the early days of an initiative to see if there are best practices that we can develop to demonstrate that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, I win, you lose, and it can be a win-win situation. I mean, the delta between the zero-sum game and the win-win is really densification, and there's some work to be done there. There's archaic rules in zoning. There's a bunch of entitlement work that needs to be done. But you know, if we want to be a social change organization, which Emerson Collective is, we're putting the work and effort behind doing just that.
That's great. And earlier today, Henry ran a great panel. How many of the people from that panel are still here? And yes, great. And you can take this information back. What he's working on is a really creative way of getting urban development and housing development in particular done such that the people in the houses will get a windfall. And if I understand it, that the investors get a return, as you said, you're hitting doubles, singles and doubles versus the home run, and then sharing that with the people who've been there, particularly disadvantaged and usually folks of color, which is quite creative.
We actually have a very similar initiative within Chicago. One of the things that we're doing is we're doing a affordable housing project, and then we're structuring the exit so that it will go from affordable rental housing into a co-op. And so we're structuring it because we're ambivalent to where the rents come from, right? So if the rents come from Section 8, Hope 6, whatever the program is, there are still rents that are the benefit of that tenant, right? So what we do is we structure that to build in equity into the property in the share of those rents, so that when we get to the time of exit and it goes to a co-op, they'll have shares. And the reason that we're going to the co-op model, again, is for a lower cost of operation versus looking at a co-op is easier to manage. And if we think about the history of co-ops, you know, we look in New York, look in Chicago, in some of the more mature cities, those have sometimes been the most successful buildings versus the ones that went condo or the ones that stayed rental. So we're looking for that to be able to create wealth. And we also think that that creates a method of not forcing gentrification.
That's right.
So that, you know, they don't get, a co-op is a better model not to get priced out of.
Yeah, interesting.
Right? So that's one of the things that we're doing that I'm very excited about. But we're also going to do affordable housing that the exit will be condos. We're also redoing single-family houses too. And again, all of those models are going to be built to be able to create home ownership and equity ownership in the properties.
It's fantastic. So let's talk about direct investing. Do you do direct investing? And so I'd say direct investing and fund investing. So if we step, and the reason I wanted to go there is because we talked earlier about you've got to be able to take the risk to get the return. We've heard all day that there's not enough risk capital going to folks of color and women. Tell us how you're thinking about that and examples of where you've demonstrated that. Either one.
Yeah, sure. Well, so that's part of my role is in direct investing on the venture side. I don't do any fund investments. Emerson Collective does, because we have a broad spectrum of places we put capital to work. But the work I'm doing on the community development side is I'm sitting in the chair. I'm the one that's responsible. If it blows up in my face. And the same thing on the venture side. I've only been with Emerson for 2 years, and that's not enough of data to say whether I'm right or wrong. I'm hoping I'm right, or else I wouldn't be doing this.
And when you make those decisions, is it just you, or is it a team?
Oh, no.
Oh, it's a
That's
team.
not my money.
Yeah, okay, just making sure.
But the answer to some of your questions, some of the things that we think about when we make venture investments, especially the earlier stuff, you get to a C-level, Series C, Series D, it's kind of hard to have real impact because you're just one of many numbers in a capital stack. But in your early seed A and B, you can really affect influence. And some of the things are just common sense things that companies don't do, not because they're malicious, but because they're trying to get to they're trying to find the fastest path between where they are to being cash flow positive and completely independent of needing to raise capital. And some of the simple things are, hey, how about creating an internship for people of color? And as long as you define that internship around skills they actually need, 9 times out of 10 they're like, oh, that's actually a great idea. I wouldn't have thought of that, but you made me think of that, and why would I say no? Some of it could be, and we're still working through this, but some of it could be like you need to have a more representative workforce relative to your customer base, and that's not unique to us. I think that's coming. It's a growing movement nationally, but there's modification of the mission to make it at least incorporate concepts of equity. Again, not every investment it's suitable for, because some missions and some products just aren't necessarily lend themselves to that. But where they can, and it's not incrementally a change to the business, then it's where we try and ask them to go in those directions. So I think direct investing from a venture perspective, you can really move the needle. But the other side of it is also how you build your team. So I've put a lot of time into making sure that I don't just go, so my office is in Palo Alto, so I don't just go out of the way and just, okay, I'm just going to go to Stanford and hire a bunch of Stanford grads. Like, I think 50% of the venture market is from two schools, Stanford and Harvard. I went to neither. So I go out of my way to go to, we're actually going to have a bunch of people at Morehouse Spelman 3 weeks. I go to smaller schools, like we have Fresno State, which is like a school out in the countryside off the 99 in California, which no one goes to unless you're hiring locally, and so forth and so on. Because I'm sure this has come out multiple times in this conversation here, that people hire themselves, right? So if I go to Harvard and Stanford to bring on people that are on my team, I'm probably going to invest in products and companies from Harvard and Stanford, or that look like Harvard and Stanford. Maybe it's not Harvard, it's Princeton. Maybe it's not Stanford, it's Columbia. But so if I go to places and put a team that looks different, it should yield results that are different. If nothing else, they're going to be definitely more open to something that looks different from what the Stanford person would be open to investing.
Yeah.
Jim, risk capital.
I'm able to do direct investments. I'm able to do invest in funds, and I also invest in fund of funds. So on the private equity side, we focus on venture and growth capital. We focus on fund managers that are African American women and other people of color. Subjectively, that's pretty much only what we do. We believe in the premise that there's an inefficient allocation of capital to entrepreneurs of color and to women. And so we think if that's our universe that we get the best of the best out of that we're going to be okay. The other thing that we believe as well is we don't believe every investment that a entrepreneur or that a African American fund manager is going to be successful. We're not putting a different lens on them than the traditional lens that is in venture growth capital. 20 investments, 3 or 4 are going to be okay. But the early returns that we're getting, that entrepreneurs and women of color are better investors and have less failure in those companies. Our direct investments in companies are meant to be very patient and aren't meant to be onerous. One of the lessons I learned as when I started my investment management company, and I was very successful in raising the money I needed to start it, was nobody really told me that there was bad capital. If you raised capital and you were able to get your doors open, that was good capital. But when I was ready for where I had a offer that would have had a 2.6x return, I had a private equity investor who literally said to me, well, if they're going to pay you that now, they'll pay you a 6x, in a year. Needless to say, we never got there, right? And that would have been a pivotal return. And so I'm very conscious of that experience when I'm working with, if it's a minority fund manager, if it's a minority business owner, or even a fund of funds. And then across that as well, with all our fund investments, we also want to have co-investment rights. We think that allows us to spread our network to be able to find opportunities to be able to invest. So I don't have to build out a massive investment team, but find and reward the good investors that we invest with.
That's great. And when you're investing, are you agnostic to the stage? Are you seed, venture, growth?
Yeah, I'm pretty much. I tend not to like, people like to be rote in what they do. I tend to like to be a little bit more opportunistic, but do it with a good underwriting rigor. I've learned how to underwrite. I've learned how to do workout. I'm not scared of doing those things. I like to be, I guess, probably it's a horrible term, but I'm a bit of a benevolent dictator. If I am invested with you and then we get to a bad place where we have to do a workout, it's going to be the most pleasant workout that you've ever been in. I've done this already where, some of my entrepreneurs had personal guarantees. I, from experience, know what can happen to a personal guarantee. Cautionary tale was I had my equity investors in the company. They guaranteed also a debt, was carried it after the business, after we dissolved the business, it was still carried. We kept the corporation open because we had lost carry forward. So there was a note that was carried with my guarantee, was $850,000.
Oh my.
I didn't have to worry about it because I knew my investors. But then 2008 happened, and one of my investors was forced into bankruptcy, and they had just purchased the entire rest of the note from the other investor. And he was in bankruptcy, and when the note was discharged, I was 1099 for $850,000.
Oh my. Wow.
And it doesn't make a difference if you've never got the money.
Wow.
Uncle Sam still wants the taxes. So I'm very conscious of the risk of what an entrepreneur has to go through with what they have to put up and what they have to sacrifice. So that's something that I'm able to take off the table if somebody's failed. Right? It's okay you're failed, but I'm not going to kill you. Right? I'm going to allow you to pick up and to be able to move forward and find your next good idea to be able to work because you've learned more.
Yeah.
So that's what we try to be able to do, and that's why we have a very broad universe of where we will invest.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. You didn't have to. That's what I was talking about earlier, right? Authenticity, and sharing the stories. Speaking of which, we talked about the importance of stories and the range of things that you might invest in. Can you share a little bit about the entertainment?
Oh, yeah.
Sure. So in January of this year, we bought a entertainment company, Wayfarer Entertainment. And one of the reasons that we did is, one, my principals are very interested in telling stories. We were the money that was behind finishing the Maya Angelou story. We've also done documentaries on other philanthropists like the Rosenwalds in Chicago, who's the largest and most famous Jewish philanthropist. So to be able to tell those stories. But one of the other reasons is that because our overall mission is narrowing the gap between racial, social, and economic inequalities, and because of the work that I did early in my career at MacArthur, a lot of the work that I did at MacArthur, those models, those stories have been lost because there was no place at MacArthur to capture them. And so things that we did that were really transformative only exist with the people who did them. So with us wanting to be able to be a catalyst for change, we know that we have to be able to tell our own story. And we know that the ability to be able to tell that story is going to be through different types of media content. And so we wanted to have a platform that allowed us to control that. And at the same time, we also want the content that we do to be uplifting. And so we found a aligned company, and we bought a majority stake, and then we've also created a studio, and we have a documentary that's coming up that's as I've been told, it's a love letter to African American women, invisible portraits. It's done by a fabulous young woman who was part of a victim of the Me Too, who was one of the executive producers on Loving.
Oh.
And had, had an experience with one of the other producers of that, through that. And so we've been able to support her through the production and post-production of that. So those are the types of things, the flexibility that we are able to do with that. But again, being able to tell a story is something that is able to resonate, and it's able to be, then somebody can be inspired by that.
That's fantastic. I want to make sure that I leave some time for the audience. I have several other questions I can ask, but rarely do we have the benefit of being in the presence of such talent and a position to really have an impact. I did want to ask one question that I know is on the minds of many. What is Steve Jobs' wife like? And you get a sense of what she, if you have any insight into what inspired her to even do this.
Yeah, great question. So her persona in the media is her being her authentic self. She actually does care about the things that she discusses in all her public speaking events. And she's very much, putting her money where her mouth is. I mean, if you look at the laundry list of things we have in Chicago, we have Chicago Cred, which is looking to reduce gun violence in Chicago.
So that's Chicago Cred. Tell folks what that is. Not everybody knows.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's led by Secretary Arne Duncan, which I didn't know he was from Chicago. I don't know much about Chicago. He's from Chicago.
He is?
Yes. And he, after his time in the Obama administration, looked around what was going on and wanted to affect change. And so he partnered with Lorene to create Chicago Cred, which is very much focused on specifically the male youth in Chicago and giving them alternatives to the current gun violence that's plaguing the city. And I wouldn't say it's solely because of Chicago Cred, because the numbers of people that go through Chicago Cred is not high enough. But gun violence in Chicago has definitely been coming down over year over year. And they continue to be additive to the solutions of gun violence in Chicago. Then we have the XQ Super School, which is looking to reinvent high school in America, because high schools are failing our people. The public schools, private schools, if they fail, they're not private for very long. So, and that's led by a woman by the name of Ruslan Ali, who was also, and surprisingly, also in the Obama administration, also focus on education. Then we do active direct investments in education through the Venture Lens, EdTech. We have investments in health, predominantly oncology. And then we have the stuff that I'm working, which I mentioned here. We have an investment and focus on climate. That's kind of my entry point into the organization. How do we reduce GHGs? Because this is the only planet we got. Until they make the fancy rockets, if we don't get this thing right, there's not going to be much of us left. I often tell people, funny and click on it with climate, is that this planet's been here longer than we have, and it's going to be here after we're gone. So we can either continue to be the virus on this planet as it gets rid of us, or we can work it out and try and stay here.
You mentioned that the communities of color are 3 degrees hotter.
Yeah, there was a report out. I wish I could give you the specific, but it came out in the past 6 months that said in the U.S., communities of color are generally 3 degrees hotter than the rest of the country. And reinforcing the fact that disadvantaged communities are definitely disproportionately affected by climate change. Everything from, hey, the government put out this tax incentive. If you buy a solar panel, you can monetize 30% of that as a tax credit. Well, if you don't have sufficient tax capacity, that doesn't do anything for you, right? And there's all these different structures where the solutions, just to buy a solar panel or at least a solar panel, I think the current structure on solar panels is like, they check your FICO score, and if you're not above 650, no lease for you. And you have to outright pay for everything, and those systems are anywhere between $50,000 and $25,000. And no one's gonna lend against that. It's a mess. And so this disproportionately affects people of color because it's just not set up for us to win. So working through that as well. Then we also have a relationship with the Elemental Accelerator, which is originally a Hawaiian-based accelerator for startups, which is now in California. And they have a new equity and access track where they look at financing or putting money into companies through a safe structure where the companies satisfy two criteria. They have what they call equity in, where the company actually has a more equitable management team, and then equity out, where they're helping people of color in disadvantaged communities.
So she cares. So what?
That's where we're putting our money where our mouth is. So, yeah.
Do you know what spurred her to care about all
Sorry.
this?
Yes. So there's a city across the 101 from, actually it's actually the creek, but for reference point, it's called the 101, called East Palo Alto, not Palo Alto, East Palo Alto. And the students of East Palo Alto are actually the students that inspired the movie Dangerous Minds with somebody. And
Michelle Pfeiffer.
Is it Michelle Pfeiffer? I was going to say Jodie Foster, so good thing I didn't say anything. So when Laureen, a little bit over 2 decades ago, was first moved in, it was like right after her degree at Stanford, she started going in and mentoring the students in East Palo Alto. And she quickly realized that it wasn't what people are often told when they're disadvantaged. You need to work harder, or it's you need to understand where the schools are. It was some basic things like, hey, I don't have light in my house, so even though I want to work harder, I can't, or there's too many people in the house, so even though I want to study, I can't focus, things like that. And that led to the founding of College Track, which is one of the longest standing programs that we have a relationship with. And College Track has since spun off. It's not part of Image Collective. It's just a partner, if you will. And that started her down this path of, well, if this is going on, and start asking questions. And as you continue to look at and see the disproportionate way that people are giving opportunity, and if you have the means, you start thinking, well, what can I do to be helpful?
Great. So with that, I'll pause and open it up to the audience if you have any questions. Oh, yes, Sandy. Sandy's the brilliant mind who's behind the Cook Center here at Duke University, and he's done a phenomenal amount of research.
You should have been up here then.
Yeah. Did you hear that, Sandy? Kojo said you should be up here.
Well, he's getting his prepared remarks ready.
Thank you, Valerie. I wanted to say this is a mutual admiration society, and I wanted to congratulate you for being named International Person of the Year by the Powerless Black Excellence Group. So.
Thank you.
So I have a question about the relationship between activities of individual firms or businesses and the global consequences of those actions. I was thinking specifically about the opportunity zone strategy. So obviously from the standpoint of an individual business or enterprise, there's a benefit from taking advantage of the tax credit for the purposes of trying to undertake some new initiative in a community that, that might have a relatively low level of income. But on the other hand, if we think about what the global consequences of that is, it goes fully in step with a tendency that's apparent in the Trump administration's approach to fiscal policy, which is to eliminate public sector spending altogether. That is to say, we rely then upon the private sector to undertake the funding of these initiatives via tax incentives in such a way that we don't have any public sector spending involved at all. And so not only do we reduce tax revenue, but we simultaneously reduce public sector spending, so we shrink the size of the public sector altogether.
I'll go. Okay, so that's exactly one of the things that we are trying to mitigate. Everything that we're doing within the opportunity zones is to benefit the indigenous population that's within that locale. The other thing that we are doing is we are primarily investing in businesses so that the equity dollars that we put in, where we get the tax incentive in, are then sponsoring companies that are growing and creating jobs within within that community and increasing the tax base. We are also in Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot has just put up, I think it's $200 million to use allocated city funds to be in opportunity zones to be able to co-invest. Governor Pritzker is also using infrastructure money to be able to go in. Because if we look at a lot of these communities, it wasn't just affordable housing leaving. It wasn't just jobs leaving. It wasn't just schools declining. It was all of the above. So we're working and intentionally working to make sure that in rebuilding these economies within these neighborhoods, that we have a totality of a solution. And we hope then, by creating those models, that will be able to be replicable in other jurisdictions. That's one of the reasons that we are not just going to be centrally located in investing in Chicago. We're investing in North Carolina. We're investing in Atlanta. We're investing in Los Angeles. We're investing in Louisville. All of those, we are being very particular in creating, in investing in or creating models that are specifically adjacent with, so like in Louisville, we're partnered with the Louisville Urban League in what they're doing. And so and then one of the other components for everything, and Taleb and Napoleon, one of our side letters is the most important return that we're looking for is what is going to be the metrics, what are going to be the measurable improvements. So we're being very intentional about that. And then on the private-public, my career started as a tax-exempt portfolio manager. And, you know, most of this infrastructure in this country was built by public debt, but it was also by municipal debt, you know, which for the most part, municipal debt was held by individuals or trust so I think, again, it's looking at where is that money going to come from for that infrastructure financing. It's not going to come from the traditional sources that it came from, because our infrastructure is dying, is aged in this country. So we do have to find what that new mechanism is. I look at what the Trump administration has done with opportunity zones as we can use that we can divert the unintended consequence of that to the benefit of our communities. And that's what we're trying to do.
Great. And introduce yourself when you speak, please.
Yes, I'm Taleb Graves-Mans. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm one of the partners on Opportunity North Carolina, and our product is Opportunity 504 that Jim has been speaking about. So I give a little bit of color on that and kind of tell you why we care, okay? And why we kind of exist is because we're fighting against the number that really 2053, they say black wealth is what? Zero. And primarily the reason why is around real estate and asset holding. And nothing frustrates me more and our team more than seeing grandma sell the house and then seeing Uncle Joe sell the business. And in Durham is a microcosm of that, which is extremely frustrating. Well, many of my friends here know that it's what we commonly talk about. So when we saw opportunity zones, we hacked at how can we use the opportunity zone platform to create more generational wealth for families. And that's what led us to Opportunity 504. So 504 SBA 504 loans. Currently, there's 10 billion of those happening every year annually, and less than 1% of those transactions go to blacks. And the reasons why are, one is a lot of African-American business owners are running really tight businesses, tight in the form of on the margins, right, how much money they have in operational income. So some of them don't think that they can buy the property, right, so they can secure the main asset, so they don't approach the bank. Or when they do get to the bank, they say, you got to put 20% down or 10% down. And they say, well, how much is that, $200,000? A lot of them have that. It might be sitting in their operational account. They can't make the leap into ownership. And where we step in is we mitigate that risk and become in as an equity position on that property to take them from renting to owning their property. So think about that lawyer, that accountant that does a really good operation, been in their building for 10, 15 years but never jumped in, or that auto mechanic that has a shop that's invested so much into their business but can't take the leap to jump in. And in those communities, those communities are changing, right? They're gentrifying. The property is becoming worth more and more and more, yet this person is not realizing both the gain on their business as well as the real estate. And that's why we built it. I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarity so many of you, we can talk a little bit later about what we built around the opportunity zone.
Thank
The
you.
reason why.
Any other questions? Yes?
Mr. Sharp.
Of course she has a
Oh,
question.
but, 1 second.
Testing.
Star, before you, there's David.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. David Sharp, Urban Advisors. We actually run a fund called the Up Community Fund based in Charlotte, North Carolina, Southeast focused. And we're focused on funding entrepreneurs of color. We launched back in 2018. We've invested in a dozen companies, about $5-6 million out the door already. And so Southeast is really our focus. And oh, by the way, we're actually owned by entrepreneurs of color as well. And so what's interesting in the conversation is, like, I know Napoleon. We've known each other for years. And I've actually known Jim for over a decade, kind of being in the impact investing space. But what was interesting that I'm picking up today is we're all doing these things. And I didn't realize it till today in terms of how much intersection we have. So I think it's kind of important that we make each other aware of what we're doing. Like, as an example, SoCap is going on this week. I chose to be here versus being at SoCap because I know where the capital is, but my heart is here with our community, with our people. And so I just feel like what you guys are doing is amazing. But the same way that in the emerging manager space, there was a database that had, the funds that were coming up and who the investors were and finding alliances between us, I feel like that's something we should do now, especially as we're moving more into this impact space, which many people in the room may not even be aware. Most of the people in the impact rooms where dollars are transferring don't really look like most of us.
That is so true.
But most of us don't really know what impact investing actually is, which we actually have a right to be at that table, but because we don't know it, there are other people that are aggregating capital saying that they're going to invest in us because we're not aware of that.
David, the question that you're asking is, I think.
So the question is around, ways in which we can make sure that that we can, either through a database or through some type of mechanism, maybe it's through the center, where investors that are interested in this sector, fund managers that are active in this sector, we can start kind of populating that so folks in the room could be aware of who's actually out there and what they're doing.
So I'm on the board of a company called New Profit, and New Profit is a social venture fund that funds social entrepreneurs, mostly nonprofit, but increasingly more for-profit. And one of the things they do is make sure that they convene people, convening power. So I'm wondering if you've done anything like that or are open to doing that. Maybe we can start it.
Quickly, that's literally part of my job. The reason I'm here today and not out looking or doing deals is because part of it is bringing others to the network, let others know what I'm doing. because we need to be able to make it sustainable. In other words, I need to come out from behind the curtain. It's not to promote me, but it's to promote what we're doing and the things that we're doing to be able to find like-minded investors. So if there's a family office or if there's a trust, how do we do this? How do you do 100% impact? Well, I'll send you our IPS. I'll send you the IPS for our foundation. I'll give you the building blocks to be able to go and do that. So we do that. We belong to the Mission Investors Exchange. We participate with Urban Institute. All of the things that I do like this are made to be able to build awareness. Part of learning how to run and raise money, I got really good at running money and raising money. You have to build awareness, favorability, and acceptance. If you do those, then you earn the right to be able to ask for the order, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And that's, I think, a cornerstone of what we're kind of doing here, is to be able to build awareness, to be able to connect people, to be able to connect old friends, to know that we're already connected, right? To be able to bring those things together. My manager of direct investments, she's at SOCAP. The third person on the team with Napoleon and Talib, Wilson Lester, he's at SOCAP. So we're making sure that, you know, I'm not going to SOCAP anymore. But, you know, I have somebody there who's out there who's collecting. They have somebody there who's out there and connecting. But that's one of the things that we really want to be able to do. We really want to be able to, you know, find where the solutions are. I'm going to SRI. And the reason I'm going to SRI is I found one of the things we invested in, it's called Capital Good Fund. And it's a alternative to payday loans, right? It's a partnership that we're doing with JP Morgan Trust. We've started them in Illinois. They were already in Maryland. They were in Florida. And we've now found out that somebody else is going to be doing them, sponsoring them in Texas. And so, you know, that was one of the things where we knew we were never going to be able to defeat the buy here, pay, you know, the payday loan lobby.
Right,
But what we could do is create a better platform.
that's right, and disrupt it.
Right, and be disruptive.
Right. We talked a little bit about the notion that you can have private dollars directly lending to
Right.
some of the municipal employees so that they aren't as reliant. There's a mayor that said that a lot of our employees are reliant on that. So there could be a way that we can give direct loans, which are attractive loans, but they aren't at 20-something or 30-something%. Usury.
Yeah, there's a couple of organizations, some of them are nonprofits, that are using the structure of microlending that is typically found in emerging markets here in the U.S. to bridge that very same gap.
Oh.
So, I mean, it's kind of like an obvious one, like, well, we'll use it in an emerging market, we won't use it here.
Yeah.
It's still money. Like, in the structure, fundamentally, they've already proven that microlending works, so why would we not?
Right.
I agree with you that there should be a platform. That's one of the reasons, similarly, that I'm here, is that, you know, I don't want to be in my office talking to myself saying, hey, there should be a platform, and not go out and kind of help build those bridges. And I think it's through all the entire process of entrepreneurship, right? I mean, it's a source of capital that needs to be, you know, bridges there between all the different components of capital, but then also on the management teams that you're going to potentially need, right? So typically an entrepreneur, when they bring on certain investors, they're hoping, in addition to bringing in money, they're bringing in a network that can help them bridge the gap and get their company to that next phase. And if that money you bring in doesn't bring in the kind of management team that looks like you or the kind you want to build, you end up right back where we started. Yeah, you that one individual who's an entrepreneur is better off, and that's better than zero, but that's not the outcome I'm assuming that anyone wants. We want to uplift everybody. So building bridges across not only just through the investors, but also for the management teams and also amongst entrepreneurs. And back to the lessons are in the scar tissue. You can learn from someone else's mistakes.
That's right.
And avoid them. So having that connectivity is super powerful, and I think it's a good place. I mean, for-profit entities, they're going to want to find a way of kind of leveraging that into maybe deal origination, so forth and so on. But academic institutions, it's just knowledge. So they're kind of well positioned for things of that nature.
That's right. So let's say that we will, between Henry, putting you to work, and those who worked on this, Sandy, we can get a database. And I always say selectively for things that are passion projects, I'm happy to host something on Martha's Vineyard that brings folks together, and where you were born and around this. And Conceived, yes, not born, conceived, yes. We have 2 questions, and then we have to cut it off, I think. I don't have my watch right now. Star?
So a family office is the largest investor in my company. But I didn't know what a family office was until I started raising capital and someone introduced me to someone who was in a family office. And I get some investors who say, well, why hasn't your largest investor taken a board seat? So my question is, number one, how do we find more family offices? I think that's a good way for us to get additional investment, but we don't know who they are, where they are or who they are. That's number one. And then number 2, do you ever make significant investments and get involved in the running of the company?
Family offices are a very insular community, for good reason. Part of my job is protecting the security of my principals, and being the outside face for them, because of all of the inflow that they can take. So it's probably by design that most family offices have a very low profile. You can Google our family office and you will not find anything. We do not have a presence, and that's intentional. And a lot of family offices are the same. One of the things Kojo and I are going to talk about after this is, I know my manager of direct investments is talking to somebody at Emerson Collective about a project, and I want to make sure that we hook up on that. We're in essentially, while they're not a family office, they do.
Walk and talk and smell like one?
Yes. That's a good way to put it. I think part of it is what the types of family offices that are being formed and that are happening now are probably different than some of the traditional generational offices that existed before. Mm-hmm. And they're taking the giving pledge seriously. Mm-hmm. You're seeing generational transfers of wealth going to millennials that have a different ethos than what was there before. Mm-hmm. I'm involved with a group that is literally a group of family offices that convenes once a year to look at things that are changing, and the family offices that are there are intended to get shit done. That's what the mantra is of that, and that's where the thing of the connection we made with Emerson Collective was meant. So to your question as an entrepreneur, you really have to be able to network and be out there and try to look at those things and read. Read the story. Every once in a while there will be a story, and their unintended consequence of that story, they will mention that we made an investment. I will do my best to make sure that that doesn't get out, but it does. And then I'm out and pointing to people. But then I'm pointing to people, they're my shield, right? They're the ones that are doing the work. They're the ones that I want to get the press, and that's the model that I want to have exacerbated to be able to be successful. I don't want the light on me. I definitely don't want the light on my principals. And so we're trying to lift up those people that can make the connections with entrepreneurs, to be able to get that access. To the question of, I have a group of CEOs that, again, people that I've known for 30 years. If there's a leadership within one of my companies that is in trouble, I will put them on the bench and bring in a CEO. If I have to take a board position, I will. Usually in my case, you don't want me to, because that means that there's trouble. And I'm doing something else. But we will pay to build capacity for that entrepreneur, for that CEO, if it's coaching or whatever that is.
We have one last question.
How's it going, guys? Quick question, and it's really revolving around kind of where I find myself in the trajectory of my career, and as it relates to what you guys look for in your mandate and who you invest in. So I started my career off at Fidelity Investments, so I didn't take a traditional path to private equity. And when we raise capital from family office, many times, it's all about track record. Mm-hmm. So I'm a partner in a private equity group, but I'm not the only person in that private equity group, if you know what I mean. But ultimately, it's just strategic, right? I mean, I'm kind of working and carrying two flags. So as it pertains to how you guys invest into deals, whether direct or in funds, do you guys typically take a look at all the partners? Because for us, I mean, there's 3 partners. We're all Fidelity guys. 2 of us are one's Hispanic, one's Black. Obviously, one is Caucasian. And we just kind of, we probably have about 100 million AUM in the private equity real estate space, do a lot with industrial and so forth and so on. But clearly, I'm, not the only guy in the room. There's other people that look like, like something else. So I just want to see how you guys take in consideration when it comes to people that approach you that are maybe present a deal that looks like whatever your mandate may be, and it kind of checks all the boxes from cash on cash, internal rate of return, or whatever. And do you guys take that in consideration when you're investing in your deals? Yeah,
I can start. So I don't do fund investments, but do direct. Not every. Yep. Not every entrepreneur is, they're on their 4th startup or what have you. Sometimes it's just the first time. Maybe they're an academic, what have you, that's spun out. And I see my primary role is just kind of identifying and retiring risk. And so when I'm looking at a particular startup with an entrepreneur, I'm asking myself, does that person have the sufficient skills, or does that person have the sufficient network, or can I bring a network to compensate for what they don't have to make sure that the thesis for their business actually can be realized? Right? And that's everything from, okay, I'll put in $1 now, but I believe that over, let's say it's 5 years to cash flow positive, they might have to come back to the capital markets 2 or 3 more times. Do I believe these people are going to show well, or have someone on their staff that can articulate the vision properly? Is the business going to have a sufficient enough of a trajectory that it all makes sense? All the basic underwriting stuff you would think about. And then the part to answer your question directly, when there's a situation where there is this gap, then for me it's simply you go a little bit deeper on the individual, and you move away from relying solely on the experience to define their path forward. It is harder, it's more work, so therefore, if you, on the other side of it, you're that individual, the pool of capital is going to willing to show up and invest with you is going to be smaller, because it's just easier to say, oh, you've done it 10 times before, the likelihood of 11 being right is good. But there's a meaningful number of people out there, especially for exciting two things: mission-driven organizations or just exciting products that people will take the risk and do the extra work to get comfortable with the risk associated with a person who hasn't necessarily done it before.
So would you guys join me in thanking these two incredible men who are capital providers